Welcome, everyone. I'm Chris Lindgren with MassBio. Thank you to our speakers and our academic industry relations working group co-chairs for making this webinar possible. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom center of your screen to ask questions versus using the chat, but the chat is available for you to communicate amongst yourselves or with our panelists. But for questions, please use that Q&A function. It makes it a lot easier for our moderator. Also, I wanted to mention this morning that MassBio's entrepreneurial mentoring program called Mass Connect is now running a program solely dedicated to principal investigators. If you're interested in finding out more or applying to be a mentee, you can look at, I've provided some information in the chat window. And with that, I'd like to now turn it over to Alex Lynn, our moderator, for introductions and our panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome everyone to our MassBio virtual forum, from Brainstorm to Bedroom. When is the right time for faculty to form startup? My name is Alexander Lin, and I'm honored to be your moderator today. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Academia Industry Working Group here at MassBio, and myself a first-time entrepreneur, having spun out a software company, BrainSpec, out of my lab at Brigham Women's Hospital about 3 years ago. So I'd like to welcome you all to this forum. Thank you for taking the time. And I'd like to introduce our esteemed guest panel and give them a chance to introduce themselves and briefly discuss their experience with startups. So we'll start first with Victoria Bolentina from Boston University, who recently started her company, Mark Therapeutics. Go ahead, Victoria. Oh, you want to unmute yourself?
I am on mute. So first of all, thank you very much for MassBio and for Chris and Alex for giving me this opportunity to share my new experience in life, which is directly related to the topic of this forum. And I'm a professor of medicine at Boston University School of Medicine. And recently I founded a new company, which is called Mark Therapeutics. This is an early stage company that targets Parkinson's disease and uses unique gene therapy to halt inevitable progression of this debilitating neurodegenerative disorder. If you don't know what Parkinson is, you don't want to know, and you don't want to experience this, but it currently affects up to 3% of aging population worldwide. So it has high prevalence, and it's second most kind of widely spread disease, neurodegenerative disease in elderly population. As you know, most probably already, that every entrepreneur has their own story. And I guess mine is only one of many possible ways how faculty who has been living a pure, blissful scientific life all their life can one day become an entrepreneur, create their company, startup, and enter a new business chapter in their life. And my story is how most probably many others had a trigger. And that trigger was when my very healthy 65-year-old father was diagnosed with idiopathic Parkinson's disease. And at that time, I was blissfully unaware of this disease and was leading a well-structured and well-funded research program in basic science, focusing on calcium signaling that, as many of you most probably know, plays essential role in cell function and survival, particularly. This diagnosis, my father's shocking diagnosis, made me look into Parkinson for the first time. And when I looked, I discovered that there is no cure. And the question which I had was very simple: why? Why, after all this time of enormous efforts in this with this disease, there is still no way how we can stop the inevitable progression of this disorder. And this very simple question brought me to a crucial discovery of previously unknown mechanism of PD initiation and progression. And most importantly, we found a new way how to stop it. And this question and this discovery changed my scientific and professional trajectory. And initial ideas which I had were so out of the box and were not allowed with anything that was going on in Parkinson field at that time, that there was no way to even think about the commercialization right away. But I kept thinking about it anyway. And one of the questions which I'm usually asked is when it may be right time to spin it out. And that was my first question as well when I was stepping on this path. And my current answer is very simple. When you have enough evidence to answer at least 4 out of every 5 questions that you asked yourself, and or you've been asked by experts in the field. And of course, don't forget that your IP, as much as possible, need to be secured at that time. And the other question which I, of course, faced was which path to take and how to find your way into this business field. And each way may be different. And sorry for accompanying sounds. That's my cat woke up and he's coming to greet everyone, and I can do nothing about this. He's the boss of the house. So, as I said, there is many different ways to find your path. And the key to what I learned, and smart people immediately kind of suggested me, talk to people. Talk to anyone who knows anything and is willing to share their experiences and answer my naive and seemingly childhood questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And so I talked to all my friends and scientific colleagues who started companies only to find out that none of their paths can lead me where I want to be. And then I started to seek for more business professional people. And OTD was very helpful in BU. Tok McMurray and Rana Gupta directed me to the business meeting like Malsi, where everyone was speaking totally, and I found out that everyone there was speaking totally different language. And then I realized that I need first to learn this business language. Not to become a CEO. I think it's unwise and almost impossible for a scientist. Thank you very much. To become a really smart and effective CEO without proper education and years of experience, but simply to understand my rules and concept of the business. And in this respect, Mass BioConnect PI program, which you already heard from Chris, was enormously helpful for me and helped me find the expert mentors. And I'm very grateful to all my current mentors who patiently answer my questions and help me navigate this new path. And I think, and I would like to thank one person in particular whom I met during Multi meeting, that told me that it's okay to sometimes be scared of all the new things that you need to learn and all the new set of challenges that you need to overcome. As long as you are not mortally terrified, you will be okay. And
that's fantastic.
That's my introduction to the start of the path which I took, and I'm moving on with this startup. And will chip in to answer some other questions about how to manage the time, but the time between lab, startup, and family, and other questions which might be interested you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Victoria. So next we have Charles Setman, who also is our kind of a resident entrepreneur who spent time in industry and is now in academia, and I'd like to give a chance for him to talk about his startup experience.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, Alex, and thanks to MassBio for the chance to talk to you this morning. So I'm a professor of immunology at the Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth, and I direct a Center for Synthetic Immunity. And we're focused on developing novel therapeutics, really using protein engineering and cell engineering to treat diseases. And before I came to Dartmouth, as Alex mentioned, I actually spent 3 years at Big Pharma, where I was a team leader and section leader, which turns out to be really, for me, an invaluable experience of how to take ideas and move them into clinical testing. And so now what we've done in early 2003, 2004, we started working on this idea that we could engineer patients' immune cells to treat their own cancer. And so you do this by taking a gene therapy, and this is widely now known as CAR T-cell therapy, or CAR therapy. And so we came up with some unique ideas, and we started doing that academically for probably 5 or 6 years and got some pretty good data. But it get to the point where, hey, if we really want this to be a thing, we want to actually put in lots of patients besides just like 5 or 10 at an academic center, we need to get a business partner. We need to have a way to do this. And fortunately for me, I'm in a department where several companies have spun out. Several have been very successful, in fact. And so with that mentorship help, we tied up with a local company called Solera Medical, which is designed to help faculty commercialize things. And so I became a scientific founder on this project with them, and they do the business side. And together we use innovation funding and SBIR type funding from the NIH to generate about $4 million of money to get us tox studies, IND, and even our first 12 patients of phase 1. And so that mechanism allowed us to get money to do that, which was really exciting. And I got all that business expertise and things that they apply. So I could be the scientist and I could be in charge of the scientific side of it. And they would do the business side. And then together we would go and talk and, do the science part of it, the medicine side of it, raise money to go to the next steps. And in the end, we ended up putting a portfolio of some of our ideas together. And this was sold to a European company. And 6 months after that, they had an IPO on NASDAQ. So that was really exciting. And they've been developing it since then. Now we've got some new ideas, and we're thinking of spinning out a new company soon in a different space. And it's been great experience. The advantage of that for me is it allowed me to stay as an academic professor and do those things with teaching and research in the basic biology, which companies are interested in but don't have time to do. And so for me, it's been useful, and it's been a way to see my ideas move from just a laboratory thing into wide clinical testing, and hopefully something that will really benefit patients, which has been a great experience.
Thank you, Charles. That's fantastic. And it's great that you're going to be starting up your second company. I think seems to be a trend that entrepreneurs, once you get into it, it's hard to get out. Yeah. And that's a perfect introduction to our next speaker, Jeff Karp, who's I would say our kind of resident serial entrepreneur. So Jeff, why don't you go ahead and talk about your experience?
All right. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to speak here today. So I started my laboratory in July of 2007 at the Brigham, and really with two main goals. One is to focus on professional development of the people in my lab. So I commit to being a mentor for life for anyone who joins. And the second is translation. So how can we take the projects that we're working on in the lab and really align them to maximize potential, that we could get new therapies or devices or improve patient care in the shortest period of time. Now, being an academic and not having any formal training in business, I quickly realized that I would need to become friends with people who did know a lot about business and about translation. And so since I started my faculty position, 13 or 14 years ago, I've made a commitment every 2 or 3 weeks to meet somebody new in the entrepreneurial ecosystem and form relationships, be it people in industry, entrepreneurs, patent and corporate lawyers, manufacturing experts, clinical trial experts, and a bunch of others. And this has actually been really important as we've been advancing various projects in the lab to really think about what happens after something leaves the lab, and then try and impose criteria early on so we can keep projects aligned. So towards that goal, I've co-founded 10 companies, and these companies have raised over $400 million, including an IPO, Frequency Therapeutics, in October on the NASDAQ, which has a therapy for treating hearing loss to restore hearing, as well as a company, Tisium, which is based in Paris, that received regulatory approval a couple of years ago for a tissue adhesive that we developed for vascular reconstruction. And so really, I've tried hard in my lab, and there's no sort of disease focus of my lab, and there's no technology focus either. I've really tried to focus on the process of medical problem solving, and then to constantly iterate that process and take insights that we gain from working with various groups and just from our experiences to maximize potential that what we do can actually advance to patients. And I think that one of the things that I've realized is that creating momentum is one of the most important things to focus on in translation. What we do in academia really represents a very small percent of the amount of effort or work that's required to change patients' lives. And this is something that took me a while to really learn the complexity of translation and all the various things that need to come together, and the creativity that's required at every single level, whether it be with patents or with a regulatory strategy or with manufacturing. You really need to work with people who are super experienced and very creative. And in many ways, I'd say it's been a very humbling experience, because I've realized how much I don't know about that. But I feel the more that I know, the more I can align projects early on towards translational goals. So that's, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I think that experience definitely is going to be very, we're going to get a lot of great advice from you on that. So last but not least, I want to introduce Laura Fletcher, who's joining us all the way from Wales. So really appreciate you coming in and joining us from far. So we have a very international cast here today. And she probably has a little different experience, more from the kind of tech transfer experience, and therefore has seen the breadth of all these different types of people. So Laura, I would love to hear your experiences with startups.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to join you all for this discussion from across the pond. Really pleased to be here. So I'll just spend a couple of minutes, give you a little introduction to myself and my organisation, which is Cancer Research UK. So I'm one of the associate directors of the commercial partnerships team at Cancer Research UK. And for those of you who don't know us, we're a really large UK-based charity. We spend around £400 million each year on cancer research in the UK and beyond. And we're actually the world's largest independent funder of cancer research, because all our money is actually raised from public donations. And in totality, we fund more than 50% of all of the cancer research in the UK. And we have what I think might be a rather unique model for a charity, in that one of our grant terms is that we actually lead on the commercialization of any intellectual property that arises from that research. So rather than it sitting with the individual universities that are conducting the research, the commercial partnerships team centrally at Cancer Research UK manages the commercialization and translation of all of that IP from across the country. So we kind of act like an Uber tech transfer office, if you like, for the whole charity and all of its spend. And we're really lucky, I guess, to have then such a enormous scope of research to be working with when we're looking at translational opportunities, which of course as a result are sort of wide and varied. We enter numerous license deals every year. we structure major collaborative partnerships and alliances with industry, and then of course formation of spin-outs is another key route by which we translate CRUK funded research. So really that we're there to catalyse that formation of spin-outs, I would say, and we've been active in this space for upwards of 20 years on behalf of the charity. But I would say over the last couple of years, we've had a real uptick in activity in this space, and we've taken, I guess, two major steps to try to help make this happen to an even greater extent than previously. So the first of those is we set up a scheme to help deal with what we saw as the barriers to entrepreneurship within the academic community, which perhaps are greater in the UK, I think, than in the US. So through this scheme, we're taking various strategies to share knowledge around how to go about setting up a spin-out, various educational fora, mentorship, and investment in accelerator schemes around the UK as well, and incubator type arrangements. And then the second major change that we've made over the last couple of years is also to create our own in-house seed and venture funds, so that we're actually in a position now to directly assist in the financing of those early stage newcos coming through from the charity's academic research. So that's, I think, two sort of major changes that are allowing us now to be even more active in this space. We then work really closely with the academic inventors to help them build the spin-out concept, to pitch for the in-house funding, and then of course to engage with external VCs to participate in larger seed rounds and Series A rounds. And we very actively play an ongoing role then in those spin-outs in terms of taking up director positions or helping with ongoing collaborations between the spin-out and the inventors academic lab. So over the years, we've now spun out, I think the current count is 43 spin-outs, and they've raised now approaching £2 billion in venture investment between them. Some of them have gone on to IPOs and other types of exits. And we find it's a successful route, particularly where we want to progress some of the most sort of complex and innovative technologies coming out of academia that really need substantial injections of cash, as well as really applied ongoing input from the inventors themselves. And that's, I guess, in terms of thinking about the criteria for what makes a spin out versus some other type of deal or translational route, I think those are a couple of things that we would always be thinking about. In terms of my own background, I joined Cancer Research UK approaching 14 years ago now. So in that time, I've been involved in all manner of deals across that range of translational routes, including spin-outs and also those other types of relationships that I mentioned. Although my current focus actually is on our large sort of strategic partnerships with industry partners that we set up. Before joining CRUK, I was actually involved in a spin-out myself from the university lab where I did my PhD. So although that feels like the dim and distant past to me now, I do have some direct experience of being a founder on that very steep learning curve from academia to, what does it take to bring some seed funding in and to launch a spin-out. So, I guess I have some reflections from that time as well. So that's all I wanted to say by way of introduction, and happy to address any questions that come up.
That's fantastic. I mean, I think as you can see, there's a kind of a breadth of different experiences here. And Laura, I'm glad to hear, because one thing I realized we were missing from this panel is we don't actually have someone who left academia yet, but you are representative of that, so that's perfect. You can speak to that as well. So I think, I'd like to kind of generalize some questions. There's already a question here on the Q&A, and please, if anyone else has any other questions they'd like to ask, feel free to add it to the question and answer. But it also goes towards the kind of discussion we want to have here. The question is, how much business experience do you need to gather as a scientist? And so I think that's a great question. I think, there are a number of different challenges that one faces as an academic before going into forming your own startup. And so I'd love to ask the panel, what's the kind of greatest challenge you faced when doing your startup? Victoria had mentioned earlier a little bit about not speaking the language, right, of business. And so I think this question is relevant to certainly that discussion. So I'd like to start with Jeff, since he has now spun out quite a few companies, but please, everyone else, chime in, and I'd love to hear what you have to say here, but we'll start with Jeff.
Yeah, I think there's, there's so many challenges. It's tough to pick one, I'd say. But one of the first ones that comes to mind is more, just before maybe there's a spin out, which is, how do we define the bar or the threshold that we need to pass to really get people excited, get the investor community excited and get others excited to join the team. And, it's kind of a different question than what we tend to think about in academia, because this question is very, practical. It's, what's the best result anyone has ever achieved in a specific model? And, how much better do we need to do to warrant, bringing in the right investment dollars and the right people to the table to then take this on and move it forward. And so pretty much at every lab meeting, I'm always asking that question, and it's very difficult to define, but it's something that I feel is a big challenge, but an important challenge that we need to face kind of every day. The other challenge that I would say is finding a CEO to lead. And I think, CEO's role is quite vast. One of the most important features I think of a CEO is someone who can fundraise, because, you can have the greatest ideas and the greatest business plans and everything. But if you can't raise money, then you can't bring your discoveries or your inventions forward. And, a CEO, in addition to raising money, so I think it's very important to find someone who has raised money before, or who has great potential to raise money. But in addition to that, I think, someone who can really bring together incredible people at every single level around the table, who can just help to elevate things, to really think deeply about regulatory strategy and patent strategy, and manufacturing and these types of things. And then I'd also say, someone who can create the right kind of conducive culture, equitable culture, a collaborative culture that can really, keep the focus, being mission driven to achieve the greatest impact possible.
Yes, I agree. I think that also speaks to the question about, how much business experience do you need to gather as a scientist, right? Because if you have the CEO kind of dealing with the business side of things, then that makes life a little easier. And that's certainly a strategy I've adopted as well.
Yeah, actually, one quick thing just to add to that. I would say that, I'd say through the years I've picked up a few things here or there, but I think it almost is kind of recognizing the strengths and weaknesses and not having any formal business training, but realizing that there's potential to form relationships with people who have deep business, expertise. And so that's really where I've put my emphasis is how can I, get myself into a situation where I'm constantly meeting with people in the business community to kind of help educate me, but as well, find people that I can work with and synergize. And I never really think that I need to know everything, but you need to have people on the table, around the table who actually do kind of fill all the gaps. So I kind of look at it more as, not necessarily knowing the business side, but knowing who I can go to kind of learn about that, or someone who can actually guide that process.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's great. I think I'll welcome the rest of the panel to unmute, and then if you guys want to, discuss anything, feel free to add to it. Charles, do you have something?
Alex, if I can chat, I'm in here. I think one of the key things to do is to create a good team, because the team is really essential, and it's not just people who are excited about it, but things don't always work. Things are going to work well and then not work well. You're going to run into surprises and problems. You need people that are going to dig into it and solve those problems, and focus on getting from point A to point B as efficiently as you can. And that requires a set of different skills and complementary skills, and to recognize you each have specific roles and responsibilities and do those things. And so when you pick the people you partner with, both other scientists and business partners, pick carefully and because those relationships are going to last a long time, and there are going to be some difficult times there. And if you respect each other and talk to each other frankly but clearly, you can work well together. But that's really important. And I think the biggest challenge is when you have people that may not accept their roles or go in the wrong direction and are working on different aims, that things can really fall apart and be difficult. But being committed to the project is really key. And I think investors are really looking for that. So when you pick a CEO or you pick a chief scientist, they're looking for people that have done it before and succeeded, because they know they've gotten over these kind of problems. And so that's one of the things I think people should really focus on, who's going to be part of the core team and get their commitment to do it.
I would really echo that. I think it can feel like a super steep learning curve if it's your first time on that spin out path. So it's absolutely critical to have the right people around you to have a trusting relationship with your tech transfer office that can hold your hand along this journey. I don't think you have to be an expert in everything. To the investors, your true value is as a scientist with those great innovative ideas. That is your niche. Some scientists may progress into business people and take on other activities, but primarily when you're trying to launch a spin out, your value is in being a scientist, which means you really have to trust other people that know more about the different aspects of what's involved, and also be open-minded that there will be sacrifices along the way. So I think, if this is the journey you choose as an academic, it can be really hard to cope with some of the loss of academic freedoms that go with that. So, be aware, I guess, that it can be quite hard to have your cake and eat it. So if you do want to go down the spin out route, inevitably there will be certain restrictions on your academic freedom in the same space, or there may be a demand for an IP pipeline in relation to that invention from your lab. Clearly the demands on your time and so on also mean that certain sacrifices in relation to academic work might be needed. So I think the whole way along that path, you really have to be taking advice and counsel from those who've been there before to understand what's fair, what's reasonable. These demands, are they normal, and really getting your head around how you deal with that. And then even moving forward into the company environment, again, being able to accept that the approach to developing an idea in the commercial world and in the academic world is quite different. So definitely having a trusted team around you, where even if the way that things go is not the way you're used to, that you feel comfortable that you can really rely on the advice that you're being given as you sort of come to terms with those changes.
Yeah, that's great. In light of that, I mean, I think there are. You always, I think it's interesting, a very different discussion in the academia world versus the business world in terms of getting that advice and networking and talking to a number of people. It's a very interesting and kind of different environment for that. And likewise, I think, the kind of questions that one asks yourselves in terms of, when is the right time to start and stuff like that is a little different from academic to industry. Victoria, I think you had mentioned in your presentation, or in your introduction rather, that there were some key, like 4 or 5 questions that you felt you need to have answered before one could start up. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, again, my stage and my experience is the freshest, I'll say, of all of the speakers, and the first question, which I think that at least I faced, was, where is this point B where you want to go? Because as my father was always telling me, decide what you want, and then it's the matter of technical details, how to get there. So you'll need to decide what you want really to achieve. And transition from academia into business is a big one, because you'll need to change a lot of ways how your brain is wired at that time. And you'll need to learn the language in this new community, in this new environment. And you'll need to understand the rules, and finding this point B where you are shooting, it's the most, I'll say, important one. And the experts, or even not experts, but those who tried before you, talking with them is very important and very helpful. And the second question, major question, how to manage the time between your science, your lab work, this new company, and the family. And it's tough, and you'll need to be ready for sacrifices, and do not your best maybe, but all that it takes at some points of time. And but hey, there is 168 hours in a week, and if you'll give 40 hours for your science, 40 hours for your family, and 40 hours for your startup, you will still have 48 hours left for sleep, eat, and all other essential body functions. So, the fact is that you see, smiling face on your screen. They're alive. They're not. They managed it, and I guess so can you. And then you'll need, as already mentioned, very important part. You'll need to have to seek help from people who know things, and OTD in your scientific environment in your university or college is very important. And establishing very good connections with them is a key for finding your point B where you want to go, and then asking the questions how to get there. And one last question, which not question, but advice which I got on my path, and it worked for me, and I pass it to everyone else. Don't try to solve all the problems from the beginning. Don't think that if you answer, 5 questions, you are ready to go. First of all, you don't know what those questions will be and how to choose those 5 questions correctly. And each one has different, again, questions to address. So choose 1 or 2 questions at a time and keep walking, 1 foot after another. And if you'll find your point B, and then it will be a matter of technical details to find the path.
That's fantastic. Very, very inspiring advice there. I appreciate that. And I think, as you just mentioned, that there are a number of problems that one runs into when doing a startup. So I also like to kind of put to the panel, what are the things that, what problems, if you could go back in time and say, okay, what things could I have avoided doing? What mistakes could I have avoided making, in my early startup? This is what I would kind of do different. Love to hear your take on that. And in point of fact, I think, someone brought up in the question and answer, what factors are important in initial negotiation to sustain an active intellectual or scientific role, and how to protect financial interests. Protecting your IP are kind of common things that can, sometimes you can do wrong initially. And so, Laura, given your experience with these 40 plus companies, do you see some very common mistakes that people have made when we're going to doing a startup?
Well, I think probably the major one is make sure that the startup is the right route to begin with. So I think sometimes the motivations for a startup can be personal motivations, but they might not necessarily be the best translational route for that piece of science. So that can be a difficult lesson to learn, that perhaps that particular invention is not best served by a spin-out route. So I think think very carefully about whether a spin-out is the most effective way to translate that piece of science. before you embark on that long and difficult journey. You know, a spin out is not just for Christmas. I guess it's going to be a life-changing thing. So just think really, really hard. Is this the right road to go down? And you know, the other thing I would say is don't be afraid to go out and road test that idea at quite early stages. So I think sometimes people feel like they need a fully formed business plan and you know, super polished pitch before they even go out and speak to a VC. Whereas actually we found, you know, if you're dealing with an experienced tech transfer office, which probably all of you would be given your location, they've probably got great relationships with a number of VCs that they've worked with time and time again, who are really happy just to hear a fairly nascent idea and give some kind of hard-nosed VC feedback. And I think that that's really vital in terms of shaping the idea and the pitch as you move forward. If you're lucky, some of them might even be interested in the idea, but even if they're not, I think that their input is really crucial. So I would say don't be too, you know, overprotective about those sorts of early conversations, because they can be really influential in terms of guiding your thinking as you go along. And maybe the third point to make is, although a spin out is a very personal thing, I think it's really important from day one to be putting yourself in the shoes of the VC and thinking not just, you know, this is a great idea and I can see how it can benefit patients in this way, but to be thinking exactly, you know, where's the next value inflection point as a VC would see it? Where, you know, how am I going to show how I can get this to a stage where there's a step change in the value or the proof of concept around this idea, and just think really carefully about how long it's going to take you to get there, how much that's going to cost, and then beyond that, you know, where's the next point? Because the VC, even from the very first conversation, is thinking, how do I get out of this? You know, how do I exit? You know, at what point is this exciting enough that we can bring a lot more investment in, or ultimately be acquired or float? So I think getting that into your head very early on is really important, and sort of failing to think through those really important points in time, I think is you know, a classic way of an academic falling down early on in some of those early pitches, because you don't want to not have a very clear answer to that question.
Anyone have any other experiences that they could share that you know, mistakes they've made in the past, or other mistakes you've seen other people make if you haven't made, if you've been flawless yourself?
I think just one kind of general comment is I think that it's important, kind of going back to relationships. I just think the relationships are so important, and you have to, and that's why it's important to start developing the relationships before the spin out is ready to be spun out. Because I think, you know, you really want to get to a position where, you know, as an academic scientist, that, you know, you're working with people in the business community that you strongly believe are working in the best interests of the technology and in your best interests, and that will be able to just maximize the amount of impact possible. And I think that you know, finding that right person that you trust takes a lot of time and can be highly iterative, you know, kind of you know, meeting lots of people and sort of feeling it out. But I think at some point, you know, you really have to be willing to hand it off, to pass over the baton. And I think that, you know, it's important to consider that, you know, especially I think, you know, as you gain experience in doing it, you know, the way the kind of equity distribution may change over time, or, you know, I think, you know, I guess what I'm trying to say is I feel like you have to be willing to give up a lot of equity to hand off to someone who can really, or a team of people who can really drive it forward and because it's just so difficult to translate technologies, and there's just so many potential areas where things can fail. And so I think, that's one of the challenges and the mistakes I think that can be made, is where you try to hold on too tightly to something. But I think the goal should really be finding people that you're willing, that really feel, someone that you may hire in your lab, or someone that, you may collaborate with, or someone that you just, you really trust and have a good relationship with, and you're really excited to work with. And I think, to me, I don't know, a lot of the decisions that I make are just driven by excitement today and then perceived excitement tomorrow. Like, will I be really excited to continue working with these individuals as someone who I think is going to bring a lot of value over time? And I use that kind of as a way to make a lot of decisions.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think that it definitely plays into trying to figure out. And I just talking to someone yesterday that in many ways, as scientists, our projects are kind of like our babies, right? And so it's very difficult sometimes to hand off that baby to to someone else, right? And likewise, I think we definitely have a lot of different ways about us as scientists, for example, publishing papers and writing grants and all that sort of stuff that are part of our DNA as a scientist, but don't necessarily work as well from the business world. One of the issues being that exactly that as a scientist, your goal is to publish as much as humanly possible, and in many ways that could sometimes hurt you from from a business standpoint. That if you release all your great ideas on the paper, you no longer can protect that IP. And so, I don't know if someone wants to speak a little bit about, what you can do to kind of protect your intellectual and financial interests and your IP interests, while still being a scientist and publishing and being and contributing to the greater scientific community. Any thoughts on that? Yeah, go ahead, Victoria.
So this is kind of the question which I would like to blend with the previous question, which mistakes you may make. And one of the mistakes which at some point I made I consider it as not a big mistake, but it's very, very often mistake that you think only that you lose this IP only when you publish it, and it's not true. You can lose it by simply posting on your website some report of one of your postdoctoral fellows or students having a little bit more details into what you are doing than you want to be out there in the real world. And when you try then to secure this IP, someone writes keywords in the engine, and this report submitted to whatever, NIH or somewhere else, pops out on the website of your institution. And that's it, you lost this IP. It will not be already patentable. So simply keep an eye on not keeping everything under the lid, but not giving out much details during those occasional and random kind of reports and publications. And the relationships are finding, someone who can really help is absolutely essential to keep your hand from doing something which you shouldn't be doing.
Great. So we have a question here on the Q&A that Charles, I might direct to you. It's actually a very specific question. The question is, how far along should a new drug or diagnostic be developed before seeking SBIR funding? Is it critical to have composition of materials IP before seeking SBIR funding?
As far as I would always want to have protection on anything that you put in a grant application or anything else. Even though grants are in theory, protected, I would still have filed before I would submit it in a grant. It's just How far along you have to be to get an SBIR? They have different kinds of phase 1 and a phase 2. A phase 1 is just typically a 1-year grant, very early. A phase 2 is 2 years, much more money involved. Phase 2, you need significant data for and a real promise that this is going to be something. A phase 1, I've actually gotten one with no preliminary data, but I thought it was a really good idea, and the people agreed. It was actually one of the best scores I've gotten, surprisingly, to me. And that project went on pretty well. The other piece of advice I would give is you have to put down milestones. They need to be quantifiable and specific, and you need to be able to hit them. So write really good ones. Don't just say, oh, we're going to do this or that, because when you want to write the next version of that, they're going to say, did you do that? You know, and you need to be able to say yes. So you really want to think about the milestones carefully. But for an initial SBIR phase 1, you don't necessarily need a lot of data. You need to be able to show you could do it. And the idea would be important. And that's a bit of focus on working on problems that are important and not just interesting. So if you go and talk to, say, if it's a clinical problem, you talk to a bunch of different clinicians, say, is this actually a problem for your patients? In some cases, the answer is no. We don't really worry about that. Then you don't want to work on that problem. And so I think what's scientifically interesting and what's important aren't always the same, and you want to develop things that solve important problems.
That's a great answer. Fantastic. I think that addresses most of the questions that have been on the Q&A. So I kind of just want to open up for the last, this last kind of 9 minutes to see what other advice you might want to give. Maybe just one point that we haven't really addressed yet is what is the kind of return of investment for academics on startups? Why get into this in the first place? And what's been your own experience? And so open that to anyone in the panel to address.
If I could just start here and say that I think the great thing about doing it is that it allows you to take an idea and move it into clinical development and really be potential for it to be, a significant drug, have significant patient benefits to potentially even thousands or hundreds of thousands of patients. You're going to need that sort of some sort of company you typically behind it. Not in every case, but in many cases. One of the biggest challenges is to change the way we think about it, and several speakers have talked about that. You have to give up control, and you also have to recognize that science isn't driving the project really. It's a combination of medicine and business strategy, and you have to accept that they're going to make decisions in those areas that scientifically you may say, it's not the best, but it is a good business strategy, and that's hard for some people to do. You really have to accept that, this is a business decision, and you're going to have to accept that. And having good partners, if we talk about relationships, and that will work out. But it's a different way of thinking about how to solve a problem, very different from an academic style. And so you have to be willing to do
that. I might make a comment on the return on investment piece, if that's okay.
Yep.
So, overall, we find that the return on investment for spin-outs over time is considerably lower than on our straightforward license deals, because often we're dealing with early science, and any founding equity that's received is so enormously diluted by the time that there's an exit. Don't get me wrong, we do make returns on spin-outs. It's not our primary driver, of course, which is patient benefit, but for us, it's a less lucrative route than entering straight licenses. Now, that's not always the case for founders, who can be quite well recognized in terms of levels of founding equity. And one of the things we try to do is to put certain protections around dilution of scientific founders' equity. So that's something to be thinking about in terms of protecting your own returns. But the other thing we've done recently to change our model is actually when we license IP into a new co, is to have a blended financial model of founding equity and license type terms attached to that. So that's just an interesting thing to think about in terms of how you structure the financial return from the company. If you rely solely on equity, then you are at risk of seeing your return enormously diluted over time.
Victoria, you want to say something? Yeah.
So if I can add a small bit of advice, which again I got from others and I used, and I can sign out up on this. that our scientific mentality, as already Alex mentioned and some other speakers, is to keep, to be in control, to stay in control of our idea, how it develops, and we think that we know, and we do know, okay, this is correct. We know how best realize this idea from scientific point of view. But talking with my colleagues and my friends, scientists who started companies, I found an interesting correlation that more control they want to retain, slower the process goes, and in many cases, actually, it goes nowhere. Right. And having 90% or even 50% at the end of the equity or of the control of the company of nothing, of zero profit, is still zero. And I was told, and again, I fully agree with this, don't be afraid to go ahead, share, your ideas with your colleagues in this, business matter, and with your co-founders, with the chairs of the board, CEOs, and all the investors. Then you will be left with maybe, several percent, 10% of equity, but the equity will be in tens and hundreds of $millions. So that's one of the things which, again, scientists and in academia trying to spin out need to decide for themselves which way they want to go.
I would just also add that I think starting companies is really just an opportunity as well to enrich one's life. Like just the incredible people that you get to work with, and I feel like you get along the way you really learn a lot about yourself and about life, and also about working with people that are not necessarily in the comfort zone of the people that you kind of typically surround yourself by. And so I feel like it really is just part of, this journey of lifelong learning and can be a lot of fun. But I think it also requires taking kind of leaps of faith to various degrees pretty much every day. I think it's, there's always moments that are very disappointing when you feel like you've hit a wall and there's no way around it. And then there's moments of excitement when finally you figure out a way around it, and things start moving forward. So I just say, just kind of is in a life journey, I feel, kind of working with people in the business community and has just really, I think, enriched my life and made it quite difficult at times as well, with all the challenges that one faces. But I think, that's part of the journey, when you're stuck and then finally you kind of like, oh, what if we contact this potential consultant or someone who might be able, and they come in and they have some ideas, things flip and they go from being really disappointing to really exciting again. And I think, it's just really awesome to be part of that.
That's perfect. That's exactly right. I think that's why we're all in this all together and doing this. So I think that's a great way to end this forum. I want to thank all the panelists. You guys have been fantastic. Really appreciate. I think there's lots of great advice here, and I hope everyone in the audience was able to glean from that. So thank you everyone for joining us here today, and really appreciate all the time that you've contributed.
All right.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, everybody. All right.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, speakers. Thank you, attendees. And thanks, Alex, for moderating.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Take care. Stay safe.
Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.